Hello, everyone. Welcome to our new episode of Drive the Conversation titled Black and Blue, where we are focusing on the intersection of being Black, but also being in the force. And our goal is to really have this conversation about the experiences and also next steps for us to continue to build strong relations between the police and community. Today, we have a beautiful panel today, and I'm going to kick us off with some introductions. First of all, you all know me. My name is Jewel Faguni, founder and CEO of You Matter Studios, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm going to pass the mic to Nicole.
Good. Hello. Let me just say hello to everyone and thank you for joining today. I want to thank the panel for participating. I look forward to participating in this conversation. My name's Nicole Walton. I am a Dallas police officer. I've been with the force now for 26 years. During that time, I've had the opportunity to work patrol, to be an investigator. I've worked neighborhood patrols. So I've done a lot of things. I've had an opportunity to experience this department or participate as a very productive member. So I've seen a lot of things. I've participated in a lot of different units, and I'm appreciative of that experience. I grew up here in Dallas, and I currently live in Dallas. I have raised two sons, or young men that I consider my sons, my son by birth, and then my youngest brother, who I consider my oldest son. So I mean, as I think Black Lives Matter, I think Blue Lives Matter, I think all lives matter. So I just want to say that. I'm going to pass it off to Major Weddington.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on the show this morning. My name is Vincent Weddington. I am currently a major with the Dallas Police Department, and I'm assigned to the Southwest Patrol Division. My pronouns are he, his, and him, and I look forward to a healthy discussion this morning. I'm going to pass it to Cletus Judge.
Good morning. My name is Cletus Judge. I'm a retired Dallas police officer. I served in Dallas for 30 years and 8 months, but who's counting? I had the a pleasure of working in several different departments. I started off in patrol. I worked 9 years at the police academy. I became a detective in the robbery unit. I worked there for 2 years, and then I went over, I became a sergeant. I also was a supervisor in the crimes against persons unit, both in assaults and in the my last 5 years, I was in supervisor in the homicide unit. Currently, like I said, I retired in 2018, and I just couldn't take retirement. It was just too much for me. So currently, I am the director of the police academy at Eastfield College. I am a husband, a father. I have two grown sons, and also a papa. And I'm just excited about being here. And also, I wanted to say that, even today, as a Black man, when the lights come on behind me, I'm still startled. So, and I have a badge and all the expertise of dealing with police officers. So I can just imagine how it is for a regular person, a civilian, dealing with police officers. I'm glad that we're having this topic discussion today, and I look forward to bringing something to the discussion. Next, I'd like to introduce my good friend, Christine Smith.
Thank you, retired great one. My name is Christine Smith. I am a detective with the Dallas Police Department. I've been on for 11 years, 10 months, and so I'm just quite shy of my 12 years. In this career, which is my second career, I have been in patrol. I spent 5.5 years in the Police Athletic League, which was an excellent position where we worked directly with the communities, especially with a lot of at-risk children, parents, youth, and provided a great service to continue to build the bridge and establish a rapport with them. So I was very proud of that. I also worked in backgrounds which had the responsibility of bringing different candidates into the police department for anyone who wanted to be a police officer. Currently, I'm assigned into criminal investigations, where I work in the assaults unit, and specifically assigned to the non-fatal shooting team. So I've been there for a couple of months, and in the couple of months, it has been very active. I will say that this experience, this being my second career, has been a great learning experience. I've done a lot of great things, but I too, like Cletus Judge was saying, regardless of being a police officer, there's still that feeling when someone comes behind you. I have been pulled over in full uniform and still held on a traffic stop for a very long time. And I'm sure we may touch on that, but that experience being a police officer, even though I was off duty in full uniform, I can relate to some of the a lot of the concerns that the community have. But I'm grateful to be here. I'm ready to learn. I'm ready to listen and to be able to offer my unique perspective. With that being said, I will toss it to also the great one, Mr. Danny Lawson.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for being here. Ms. Jewell, thank you for putting this on, and we hope to give a lot to our community. Anyway, I am Danny Lawson. I am the owner of a small business, and it's called DNL Life Skills. I spent 33 and a half years working for the Dallas Police Department. 1 year juvenile probation. Before that, couldn't handle it because too many of my kids were dying and killing people, and I figured I need to try something else. Anyway, my perspective on policing is probably going to be a little different from the other guys because I'm older and I was there before they got there. And when I joined the Dallas Police Department, it was a much different department. Back then, you only train on first watch and third watch, and each watch I trained on, the only person that looked like me was me, and it was really difficult. I mean, I got all these calls on, hey, a citizen said a Black officer said something to them, and it could have been you, and it drove me to want to quit. And a lot of other things I saw as a police officer drove me to want to quit because it wasn't what I thought. But then I said, hey, dude, you never quit anything in your life. And I made sure I stayed there. I stayed in patrol my whole career. I was a patrol officer for 10 years and I was a supervisor for the last 23 years of my career. And all of it was to stay there so I can make things better for the guys and the ladies that came after me. I knew what I went through. I knew what the people before me went through that looked like me. It was a lot worse than what I went through. And I want to ensure that I can do whatever I can to make sure nobody else did that. And my pronouns are he, him. Oh, you can say sorry.
Well, I was going to say thank you all so much again for being on this panel and having this conversation. I'm really excited to just be able to talk with you all and for our audience to be able to learn from you all and all of your experiences. So let's kick off and play the film, and then we'll dive into the discussion.
Hey man, what's the road? Yo, I got this. It's gonna be lit.
Dave, I told you, dude, I'm fine.
Or maybe we could just talk.
I'm fine, man. Hey, no sudden movements. What are you doing?
I was just getting the insurance.
I told the driver to retrieve it. Keep your hands where I can see them.
There is no talk. No talk we could have possibly had with Dave to explain any of this.
This is our time to just kind of dive right into the discussion. So I first want to just kind of gather your immediate reactions. So what character or what stuck out to you the most? Like, who could you relate to the most?
Well, I can relate to pretty much all of them. I mean, but it's scary the way that the officer, his attitude coming in. He set it up for things to go wrong. And when you come in with the attitude and things happen, then it escalates. And the sad thing about it is it's deja vu, it's true, it's so much everything. A couple years ago, I went to Florida to do a presentation. It was a young man, DeMarcus Samir, who was shot, killed by the police. Pretty much the same thing, cell phone. The officer said he ran from him, turned around, and pointed something in his direction that he thought appeared to be a weapon. And he shot the young man. And it was so sad because the entire time that they had a conversation prior, he had a cell phone. And when they rolled him over, what do you think he had? He had a cell phone under him. And that just brought me back to that. I ended up going to a young man's funeral before I left. And this was precluding all of this with Mr. George and all this stuff, but it was in me already, to sit there and listen to his friends and family. And one kid got up in the end and he said, DeMarcus. He said he was trying to get out of here. He was trying to do the right thing. And he says, hey, all y'all young people, make something out of your life, do something for DeMarcus. Don't die like this. And all this, and that the film brought that back to me. And the last point is my 23-year-old son, a few months ago, he called me between 4 o'clock and 4:45. I checked my messages when I woke up, and he called me 6 times, and he never called. And I was kind of panicking because I couldn't get a hold of him. And I finally called his mom, and she said that he wanted to talk to you because the police had stopped him. And this is not personal, about me, but I'm just going to say because it's related to what we're talking about. My son, he's a Marine. He likes to fight, so just preface that. Anyway, he's walking out of the club, and he said he gets snatched. Someone snatched him, so he turns around and he gets ready to swing. And he looks, and it's a police officer. So he acquiesced, which he's taught by his dad, and he's respectful anyway. And all his officers threw him around, threw him on the ground, put him in handcuffs, and kept him for 30 minutes. And everybody kept saying, "What are you doing?" He didn't do anything. He was just walking out of the club. And it kind of got to me, but out of the whole thing, Ms. Jewell, panel, in my presentation that I do on what to do with Stop by the Police, I've changed the name. I called National Black Police Association, asked if I can change the name. And it's now called How to Achieve a Win-Win in Police-Citizen Contact. What my son did was sit there and took the humiliation, took the little bruises, and sat there until the officer said he can go. He didn't like it. But the bottom line is, in my presentation, I asked 2 questions. They said, "Hey man, what the old dude talk about?" So I don't know, he talked a long time, but this is what I got. In all police citizens contact, comply. 3 things you do, comply. That's it. The second part of this is stay alive, tell your own story. My son and I can walk to the Fort Worth Police Department and talk to the chief and figure out what was going on because they never explained it to him. And I asked him, did he want to, he didn't want to, but we could have walked up there together, guys, and asked that question. I wasn't, the one that's crying and screaming, "Why did you kill my son?" Because he understands when the officers are talking to you, when you're being detained, you have to comply. And I just say, we're not talking about resistance, compliance. And we think, and I'm not, and the film, the young man he wasn't in this situation, but a lot of times that's what we get. Comply, 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 and live to tell your story. And I'll pass it on to the next person.
I'll go ahead and speak. One of the things that how I identify, because I don't have any children, although I'm a child of my mother, so I can understand that part. One of the things that struck a chord with me is listening to the young man in the vehicle, and then the officer explaining the exact same situation, but from completely different perspectives. They're saying the same things, but tone was one of the things that I caught off the very first part, because sometimes, as officers, they're just like, "Oh, I was, very professional with them. I was, trying to inject either humor or just have a normal conversation." And so they perceive the same thing in one way, and the young men perceive the same situation in another way. His tone was maybe a little bit more, I would say maybe a little bit more aggressive. Another thing, I think as young men, and me being in a similar situation, I think, you were very agitated because you're feeling like you did not do anything wrong, and you're trying to answer the question and you're trying to respond, but the officer is really not trying to hear any of it, because the officer already had their mind made up about how this was going to go. Sometimes as officers, they step into this teaching mode, like, "Well, I'm going to teach you a lesson. I'm going to, I'm the officer, I'm the law, and so you're going to listen to what I'm saying." So sometimes even in that teaching of the lesson, it can be perceived as condescending, like you're talking down to me. You're not really listening. You're really more wanting to hear yourself more than anything. And so sometimes, as Danny was saying, as officers, sometimes we put ourselves into a situation that did not need to happen, or recreate a situation that didn't need to happen. As far as the young men in there, I think it was just a battle of wanting to be heard. And as the officer being the authority figure is going to escalate it a little bit more because I am the law. And so you're going to hear what I'm going to say. And then next thing you know, it's just a battle. I think that is something that is very frustrating for anyone that is that's been pulled over, because no one wants to be there. You want to get out of there, but then you also feel like you want to state your position and state your ground. But I would agree, and I've told to kids all the time, really honestly, it's not so much just about comply, but just don't hold court on the side of the road. It's just sometimes it is just about dealing and knowing whatever the recourses are, but that is very frustrating when you feel like you haven't done anything wrong in the situation.
As I watched that video, the first thing I noticed is that the young male in the passenger seat seemed to be in a situation where he was having to deal with peer pressure. And as adults, I think at times we think that stops. So as an officer, if I'm trying to do the right thing, but I'm working with officers who may be a little bit more aggressive or handle a situation differently than what I would prefer to deal with. Even as adults, we give in to that peer pressure, or you don't know how to address it or stand up to it, or as a rookie officer, how do I handle this situation? An example of that would be the officers that were involved in the murder of George Floyd. The younger, rookier officers who stood around. And I know some on this panel, they may disagree with that, but there is nothing just built into the system that gives them the out or gives them the avenue to report bad behavior on a senior officer, someone who's responsible for training them. Another thing is the perspective of officer safety. I worked deep nights in a division where we had a lot of clubs and adult entertainment clubs. So clubs were open late into the night. So we're dealing with people. And as a one-man element calling for cover out, I may use my voice, my tone of voice as a deterrent. As a rookie officer, when I came on 26 years ago, we called it verbal judo. So I'm just bluffing you into believing that I have the authority right now to do what I'm doing, right? So I think officer safety or the perception of that. And I do agree with Christina and Danny that we need to encourage people just survive the interaction, survive the contact. There's no need to argue your case, argue your position on the side of the road to someone who already has their own perception, their own position, and they're not trying to hear what you have to say. So just survive the encounter and live to tell the story. Live to tell your story.
It was obvious that the officer appeared to be hyper vigilant in the video. But the thing that got me about the video was the young man in the passenger seat. I always advise people, like in that situation, he hadn't done anything wrong. He wasn't stopped on traffic. The driver was the one that was stopped on traffic. And I would, if I could advise people in that situation, be quiet. Do not interject anything, because you haven't even broken the law. If you think that you're being treated unfairly on the traffic stop, take good mental notes and try to obtain the officer's name and badge number in that scenario so that you can contact his supervisor moving forward. Certainly don't make any furtive gestures during the traffic stop. If the officer asks the driver to retrieve the insurance information from the glove box, then let the driver do it. Don't you do it. Don't do anything that's going to heighten the officer's suspicion or aggravate the situation by saying anything that's going to even make him even more vigilant. So that would be my advice. And the other obvious advice is, I always tell young people all the time, don't give them anything to hang their hat on. Don't drive around smoking marijuana. I mean, I'm just, if you got to smoke their marijuana, do it without driving. Do it in the privacy of your home or in your backyard or something like that. But once you get in the car and start doing that, you've given the officer the probable cause he needs to search the car and get you out of the car. So that would be my advice to anyone that found himself in that situation.
Okay, I agree with Vince on a lot of this, but one thing that, you know, as parents and as Black adults, we continuously, you know, we tell our young people and tell our children, our grown folks, you know, how to interact with the police officers. But I agree with Vince on the fact that we also need to give them the ammunition not to be a victim. And, you know, we always want to tell them to be safe in their interactions with police officers. But I talk to a lot of young people, and I always say, like Vince said, don't give the police the ammunition to have a reason to stop you in the first place. Make sure that your car is up to date as far as inspection and registration. Don't be driving, speeding and doing things like this. And we all understand that the landscape is not fair for African Americans when it comes to dealing with police officers. Just look at the number of murders that we've had this year in the last 5 or 6 years with police officers and young African Americans. But, you know, it's not fair, and we understand it and we know it. Just like we know when the stove is hot, we don't put our hand on the stove. So it's not fair that we have to teach our Black people that, you know, but it's been the fabric of our whole life. We got to be better than the other people. That's been the fabric of our whole existence. And what makes us think that it's going to stop with police? And, you know, historically, police have been the weapons of racism, and uncannily, they still are. So we need to understand that we need to train our young people. Hey, have your stuff right on your car. And if you want to smoke, smoke at house, smoke in the backyard, but don't drive around smoking. Don't, you know, and so when police officers don't have a reason to stop you. And one thing now with some of these new, not necessarily stop and frisk, but with the new police officer stops, every time they stop someone right now, those lights come on that car and the cameras start rolling. It's going to be pretty hard for an officer to articulate when he stops somebody and he can't articulate a good reason for a stop. So in order to make the stop, we have to give them a reason for the stop. So we need to arm our people, our young people, with the fact that, hey, don't give the police officer a reason to stop. And once you do, I agree, once they do stop you, just comply. Just comply and do what they ask you to do. Because I'd rather you come home than me to have to go down to the morgue to view a body. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, and I'm hearing a lot of themes about, like, you know, just make sure that you're coming home alive and that compliance is really key, but also the fact that, like, you all have experienced almost like each position in one way or another. So I guess I want to just pivot into what happens when compliance doesn't work and just being in the force. Because I know, Nicole, you kind of touched on, like, peer pressure doesn't just stop when you're young. Sometimes it can be in the force. So I would love to know more about your experience, just like being in the force, and how does it go into training? You know, like, what do you think about implicit bias training? How is it when when police are, like, interacting with Black communities? But I'd love your perspectives on that.
For me, like I said, I started way before most people here. And all this training that we get now, great training, we didn't get. And I'm going to tell you something that we did in the police academy. We talk about, you know, to tell you, protect and serve, protect and serve. When I left the Dallas Police Academy, November 1981, I went to West Dallas and I wanted to protect and serve. You know how I wanted to do it? By putting everybody in jail I saw. Because they told me that everybody there was bad. I saw all the stats and I go, man, murders, robberies, God, there's some bad people out there. Let me get out there, let me take care of them. And you're coming from a Black person, you know, so I don't know what the white people feel, but it's like, we have to go out there and take care of this. I did a really good job, like everybody else, on what I guess it was protection, but I don't think I did a very good job on service, because they didn't teach me what service was. And I thought I was serving, and I wasn't. Well, but I was still far from what the people in the squad car next to me were doing. And, you know, since this is my presentation is called, I do a presentation called Straight Talk, like yours, ma'am. So I always talk straight to get the conversation going. I sat in that squad car in November, in 91, 81, 82. And ladies and gentlemen, I saw them do some things to people that I wouldn't do to, I'm going to say dog, somebody will get mad, but a dog, an animal. And oh, what in the heck is this? You know, what I thought we were the good guys, and I would go home at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I would grab my stomach and I would ball myself up and I would rock myself to sleep. And I would always say, I thought we were the good guys. I thought we were the good guys. That's the only way I could decompress and get myself to sleep, because we were not all the good guys. Now, like what Nicole, everybody else said, it comes to a point where you in a position where you say something. And I did this to the young kids, and on my last day, I stood in front of them and I told them, I said, I'm in West Dallas for a reason. I left West Dallas 30-something years ago, but I came back here because I owed you guys something. And I want to come and make an amends for what I couldn't do back then. And one little kid, he said, well, sir, why didn't you do something? And I said, well, you know, I did. So he said, but you said you didn't do anything. I said, well, I know you're not going to understand this, young man, but what I did was buy my time. Remember I told y'all, the only person who looked like me was me. Who you going to tell? Are you going to tell the sergeant? He's in there trying to get a lick. You don't talk to the lieutenant unless somebody dead, and probably you. You know, so who do you talk to? And you say, you do like I do, you say, one day I'm gonna make a difference. There's a young man that I worked with for years by the name of Harold Bernard Cornish. And if you look up his name in Dallas Police Department lore, it'll probably say Serpico. You know, but Harold Cornish reported some people doing stuff to prison. He didn't really report, he just told them what happened. And they got together, because he was a black guy and the rest of the people were white. They got together and they said, if we're going to get in trouble, we're going to say he did it too. And not only did he get suspended along with some of the other people, he became a pariah on Dallas Police Department. And I talked to Harold pretty much every day now. He's still fighting. You know, like they said earlier about the young officers, what do you say? What do you do? When I left the Dallas Police Academy also, they said this. And I'm not gonna call the trainer name, but he said it like this. He said, hey, y'all pass, y'all going out there and be police officers. And I hate the fact that y'all out there with some of my friends, but y'all made it. When you go out there, I don't care what they tell you who your supervisor is. The FTO is your supervisor. If that FTO tell you to jump in the lake, you have a right to complain. But when you go complain, you better have water dripping off your butt. Now, how do you take that away and say, hey, my partner just hit this person? How do you do that? Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
I like to speak about the implicit bias training. And like I said, I left the department in 2018, and Dallas had already started doing implicit bias training. And I think it does bring something to officers that are not familiar or not even aware of what they're doing, based on the their cultural upbringing and the people that they associate with. I think people are awakened to the fact that they have been practicing some biases that they weren't even aware of. And I think it's training that we need to continue. It's training that, you know, it needs to be an annual training, not just when you come on the police department, but also annually that we need to train. And one thing I want to speak about, I worked in all sectors in the city of Dallas. I worked in South Dallas, Oak Cliff, Pleasant Grove. And one thing I can, I've had officers that when I work with, you know, a white officer, I've never had the instance to see them mistreat a black person. I've had them call someone a name before, but I checked that officer and I said, you know, you're not going to do that in front of me. But as far as mistreating a person, and like I said, you know, I guess they just realize officers that are doing these things, they know who they can do this in front of and around. And so I've been blessed. You know, I had to check I had to check more white officers about mistreating white folks than black folks, because they know I can't, you know, and one thing I had to say with that also, I was very active in the Black Police Association. And so they know who I was, and like, you know, they weren't going to do that. But I constantly believe that, you know, once these bad officers are checked, and even when I taught in the police academy, and I used to always tell officers, you know, when you get suspended for mistreating someone or abusing someone, nobody's bringing groceries to your house. And that means your friends and your homeboys that you participated in this with. So now with officers being taken care of in internal affairs, with officers being fired, with officers being sent to jail now, I think you're going to see a lot less of this, a lot less abuse of African Americans, specifically because people realize they can go to jail now and they can lose their livelihood and the livelihood of their families. So that takes, finally, when we start sending folks to jail and we start seeing people, being taken care of, fired from the police department. And when we make being fired because of abuse, when we make that a serious stain on someone's record and they can never get another job, that's when we'll see a lot of cease and desist on this abusing of African Americans. And it needs to be just as worse as a doctor, performing bad surgeries. You mess up on the police department, we need to cut you off. We need to stop you from being a police officer anywhere. That's my thoughts.
I'd like to chime in. When we talk about implicit bias, we always look at it like it's someone else who's biased. But I think that we have to be honest with ourselves and acknowledge the biases that we have. And I'll give you a very brief example of what I'm talking about. As a robbery detective, I had a Black female partner. And I remember one day we were out in a predominantly Hispanic neighborhood. We're looking for robbery suspects in plain clothes. It's just the two of us out riding neighborhoods looking for these guys. We went into a predominantly Black neighborhood, and I vividly remember locking the door. And my partner said to me, "Why did you do that?" And it dawned on me at that moment, and I'm embarrassed to say it, but it's true, that I thought, well, it's dangerous over here. 90% of our suspects on robbery calls or the robbery cases we were working were Black males. So subconsciously, that bias was inside of me, that as I see Black men walk in with their pants around their ankles and sagging, as they call it, and just hanging out, I was concerned for our safety and locked the door. So we have to acknowledge the biases that we have. As an officer, I thought, let me check myself and make sure of what I'm dealing with. Treat people as individuals and not as a whole group, right? So that's with me as a Black female, as a mother of 2 Black males who I have gotten on them about having their pants sagging around their butts. So I can relate to that. The other is, as a group of people, we really have to think about what that is and how we deal with that. And I don't think just because you have a bias or you look at people a certain way that that's bad. Is how you deal with it, how you express that, how you are encountering or interacting with people, that can be a bad thing. And I agree, I worked the division that Sergeant Lawson worked, that Danny worked. And when I came through Northwest, I was like one of 3 Black females. There was a Black female on each watch. We have 3 watches for our divisions. And like Danny said, they would come to us and, hey, we got to complain about a Black female at 5 o'clock over vacation. Was it you? No, it wasn't me. I was in West Dallas, or I was working somewhere else. So it just, during that also, that was just the experience that I had. I went in, I remember being taught, or having one of my old white trainers say to me, is that you will have battles to fight, but not every battle is worth fighting. And in that, I learned that I wanted people to be fair to me. Just be fair. If you expect for me to go out and write 30 tickets a day, then expect that from everyone else. Not that we had that would be a quota. But if you're expecting that from me as a Black female officer, then expect it from the white male officers that I'm sitting in this detail room next to, right? So again, that's taking personal ownership of my perception and my perspective, and picking and choosing my battles wisely.
Christine, I'd like to get your thoughts on your experience as being a detective and just kind of your evolution, because I've seen a trend about in the early days with training, it wasn't really proper training from what I'm hearing. It was very much more peer pressure. And now it's evolved into more like accountability. So like, have you seen like the same kind of shifts?
I mean, I've been on the department, like I said, for almost 12 years, when clearly not as long as they have, but I also came in at 36. So although I've been on for a short period of time, I came in with an older mentality, working in the corporate world. So I looked at things a little bit different, dealing with customers, whether it's just people I worked with, and because they are my customers and my clients. And so like I said, my philosophy on addressing people in the community just came from a very different place. Um, I learned that, especially with implicit bias, I actually taught implicit bias with the Dallas Police Department. I actually taught it to a lot of the supervisors back in, I think, 2016, maybe 2017. And just throughout that time, as well as just my corporate life, one of the things that I recognize is that not everyone thinks that they have a bias. That it's like, oh no, like not me. And it's like, but it's it can be negative, depending upon how you act on it. But everyone has a bias. Everyone has that thing that, it's just like driving. You don't like certain, young drivers because it's perceived that they don't know how to drive. And I've had my driver's license for a long time, and that is a bias. It's when you take that bias and turn it into it. It goes from subconscious to now outwardly, and I think that that is something that I would agree with the rest of the panel. It's something that needs to be taught yearly. We do need to recognize that there are cultural differences, because even though one could say that you're like, oh, I'm Black, doesn't necessarily mean that that same Black person has had that same Black experience. I have family in South Dallas and Oak Cliff, but I went to school in North Dallas. I didn't see some of the same things, but it's kind of like having one foot in and one foot out. And was teased a lot, even as a police officer. And it's like, well, you don't even sound like me. Like, what does that mean? It's like, because at the end of the day, like, if we were to get all pulled out and we were sitting on the curb, we would all be Black people. So it's those types of things that cultural awareness is something that is very big, that needs to be taught more, because every white person, every Black person, every other person of color has varied experiences.
Okay, well, I do want to definitely lean in on, like, there's a couple of things I heard, right? Is the importance of having cultural awareness, but also like sometimes there are officers you work with that you do have to check. I think Cletus, that's like what you brought up. And what I'm curious is like, being you are like at the intersection, right? Y'all are in the force and you're Black. And when these things happen, like when we see what happens with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and with DeMarcus, like what you mentioned, Danny, like, how do you all like navigate having conversations with your non-Black officers? Like, do you all feel comfortable talking about race? Do you all feel comfortable talking about cultural awareness? And how do you think having those conversations could maybe potentially help and be applicable to implicit bias training?
First of all, I'm going to say something real quick about implicit bias. I've been to the last couple of sessions we've had it, and I think it's a great class. However, I think a lot of times it's like closing the barn door after the horse has already gotten out. We do implicit bias training when people have been on the department 20 years. That should be a part of the hiring process to see if people have implicit bias before they put that uniform on. And you can use that as a discriminator in the hiring process. That's why they have an expression. It's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. To think that a 2-hour block of training or whatever it is in the in-service academy can change a person's DNA, it's not gonna happen. They're gonna sit through that class basically, and only thing they're gonna think about is passing the test at the end of the class, and they're gonna go back doing what they've been doing. As it pertains to having discussions with coworkers, I don't have a problem discussing these matters with coworkers when they bring it up. If they have a question and they say, where is your opinion about what happened in Louisville with the Breonna Taylor case, I will offer them my honest, objective assessment of what I saw unfold in Louisville, Kentucky. And I think that we need to have those discussions with our coworkers to let them know that, where we stand. If we think that the officers acted inappropriately, we need to explain that. And a lot of times it won't be applicable in Dallas because our training is different than the training that other smaller agencies have. So I think it's important we have these discussions with our coworkers. We need to be brutally honest with them. We need to be objective with them. And we need to let them know where we stand. My grandmother used to have an expression. She used to say, just because you wear the uniform doesn't mean you're on the team. And I think a lot of us believe that we wear the uniform, we're on the team. So I think a lot of that is important to be moving forward, being honest with our coworkers, letting them know where we stand.
I wasn't on the team when I first came, Major. I was in the locker room, and I remember my trainer. He told me several times. He says, you hear this thing across the locker room. Hey, Doug, are you ready to fire a token yet? Are you ready to get rid of them? Has they screwed up enough yet? And then my trainer would come to me and he would say, hey, you may hear some things in the locker room, but don't worry about it. You're okay. You're doing good. And he was a good guy. And, and he was trying to do it. He was more so than being good. He was being fair. But you're right. Just because you're there, like everybody go, man, they ain't for us. I'm like, who's us? Who's us? Just because you wear a blue uniform don't mean you're us. You don't, a lot of times you don't like the person next to you, period. And I remember one officer said something one day to this guy. This guy said, he called me the N-word. And this young white officer, a young older guy, he was gonna take up for me, right? So he goes, hey, don't you say that to him? He got that uniform on. As long as he got that uniform on, he's just like me. And I'm like, dude, what'd you just say? So when I don't have the uniform on, what does that mean? Don't take up for me. Let me take up for myself. But I did a good job of teeing people off over my years. Once I got over sitting in that squad car and couldn't do anything, when I said I bide my time, I did. I would tell you this. From being a rookie through the end of my career, no one abused anyone in front of me. And there's a story somewhere on Facebook. I didn't know what Facebook was, but somebody told me it was on Facebook. And someone asked the question, they said, hey, Danny Lawson's retiring today. And they said, Danny, Danny wanted the good one. He's such a nice guy. Somebody said, no, Danny ain't so nice. A friend of mine, he says, I was with Danny one day when he beat up this police officer, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to help. And it wasn't really a beat up. This guy just decided he's gonna use this kid head for a drum with his flashlight. And he was white and the kid was white, but it doesn't matter. Abusive officers, and let me back up a little bit. We keep getting caught up on this. White officers are abusive. Abusive police officers are abusive, regardless. And that particular guy was abusive, and I can't get fired for it now. I can't get charged, but I picked him up and I tried to throw him through the ground. And matter of fact, it surprised me because I think he even bounced. And I go, ooh. But I meant that. And he jumped up. He said, what'd you put your hand on me for? You can tell the sergeant. No, I don't have to tell the sergeant. I'm telling you that we're not putting up with this. I'm telling you that I don't like it.
Yeah, I'd like to have not a conversation, but I'd like to make a statement on when we do talk to officers, and it has to start at the top. As you can see, there's so many police departments right now that are getting rid of their chiefs, and when they don't handle certain situations within a timely fashion, or when they don't handle them at all correctly, you see police departments walking away from their chiefs. And I think that's where it starts right now. We need to get people in these particular jobs that are, understanding of cultural biases and differences. And I just want to run through one incident that I had on the police department right before I left. And like I said, I was working in homicide, and I had a call up in far north Dallas. I had to use my GPS because I had never been up there. And it was close to, Ritchie neighborhood. And we had a guy that actually thought he was witnessing a crime. He saw a man trying to get into a truck, and the guy was trying to get into this truck, and the gentleman that saw him called the police and said, hey, I'm witnessing a potential BMV right now. I got the guy, here's the description. So the dispatcher was on the line and said, hey, just give us the description, don't get involved, and we're gonna send some police up there right away. So the guy that was breaking into the truck actually left and went behind a building. So our caller went and followed the guy, did what the dispatcher told him not to do. He followed the guy and he cornered the guy behind a building. The guy was on a bike, and the caller said that the guy started coming toward him on his bike. The caller was in a 5.0 Mustang. So the caller ran over the guy and killed him. So when I got up there, to me, and then we found out that the car that the guy was breaking into was his own vehicle. He locked his keys in his car. He was trying to get his own keys out of his own vehicle. So I went up there with a couple of detectives, and this guy, the caller, had actually was related to some police officers, and he had called his parents and told them what happened, and he got back on the radio and made sure that he said to the dispatcher that he was in fear of his life, of a guy coming at him with a bike. So when I got out there with another sergeant, and we said, put him in jail. And the guy said, well, we know what happened. There's no need in putting him in jail. I go, but if we were in the southern sector of Dallas, when the homeowner was trying to protect his own property, we make that guy take a ride. So why would we, exclude this guy? And I was very upset about that. And I even went to my boss's boss over his head, because that was some implicit bias, but it was, from the police officer's perspective. Hey, he's related to police. We know he's a good guy, but, and I really, and I think Lieutenant Major Weddington remembers this incident, but I was really upset about this, how we, police wanted to extend some courtesy to this guy who wasn't a police officer, but maybe faintly related to a police officer. So this bias works for and against police officers also. But the training, needs to be done, but it needs to start at the top, and it needs to filter down that people on the police department know what's acceptable and what's not. That's the way it needs to run.
So thank you all for kind of sharing your perspective. So I want to ask next, when we're talking about, Black Lives Matter, but then also everyone is saying Blue Lives Matter, what does that mean to you as being on the blue team, but also being Black? What does that mean to you all?
I'll start off. When I hear people say, the Blue Lives Matter, to me, it rings hollow, because the blue lives have always mattered. And you can see that just in the sentencing of when somebody does something to a police officer. It's never been a time when blue lives did not matter. So it really rings hollow to me. And it's kind of like a counter protest to someone saying Black lives matter. And so it's frustrating to me when I hear that counter to Black Lives Matter, that Blue Lives Matter. I know Blue Lives Matter. All I have to do is charge someone with assault on a public servant, and you will see exactly how blue lives matter.
Well, I agree with the Major. I mean, I to the life of me, and I'm not a police officer, so I'm on the outside and I'm looking back in. How in the heck did blue lives come up when somebody said Black Lives Matter? I never got it. And on the other end, I'm not remember my program is straight talk. I always have to say that. You may not agree, but I want a conversation. And once again, we do not have a race problem in this country. I don't think we have a value or lack of value problem. And it's when you value that Black person, like I said, once again, back to the locker room that I was in, you hear stuff like, hey, that guy y'all killed today, was he Black? No, he was Mexican. Well, that's just as good. That shows you that some people have no regard for the life of people that are not like them. So as far as Black Lives Matters, the I don't know, just the statement itself, I don't get. I've gone to too many homes when children died, You know, we lose 4,500 young people a year to suicide. You know, we lose all these people to the new KKK, kids killing kids. You know, and all of these people, lives matters. You know, yes, we want the police officers to understand, hey, we got it. Like Major said, if you do something to a police officer, and I know this, you don't have to care about me as a Black man, but as a police officer, if somebody killed me in that uniform, or somebody hurt me in that uniform, everybody in the Dallas Police Department in their car trying to get to me. So yeah, I wish they would stop that. Just stop it, and let's just like, hey, let's before we take another step, let's figure out, why do these people have to say this? I am not working on that. I am working on the education part. I applaud the people. I love the ones that are correcting that. I am working on the education part so that when you guys fix this stuff, I have the young people prepared to move forward into their role in the new world of policing, in the new world. Well, I want your life to be different tomorrow. I want these young kids to not have to go through what we went through, because someone fixed this back in the 60s before we came along, and we're right back in the same situation. So I applaud the people that are doing the social injustice and social justice marches. I, on the other hand, are going to educate the children and have them ready for y'all when y'all get through. My 2 cents.
And I guess like just a question just to lean in, like, has it really been fixed? So to be more specific in terms of for everyone else that wants to answer on Black and Blue lives, what I never understood is like, Black is, I'm always Black, right? But if I was, you know, in the force, I can take off my uniform. So to be specific for those who want to continue to answer, like, what does that mean to you in terms of like the comparison? And some of you have already kind of touched on that as well.
I mean, I will speak as a Black person who is a woman who's also an officer. I have Facebook, and I touched on that, and those are 3 different dynamics. I think as an officer, one of the frustrating things is that when there's an incident that happens across the country, to try not to just sandbag it and put it with everything else, but to look at it individually, and to be able to call out when we did wrong. Like, so if we're talking about blue lives, but that blue life messed up, and it's okay to tell them that that blue life messed up. It's not like, oh, we're going to try to find some sort of reason to rationalize the situation. No, they messed up, and it's okay as an officer to say that another officer messed up. So when you want to talk about, you know, lives being mattered, it's okay to call people out. As a Black person, who's saying that Black Lives Matter, you just want to feel that you are receiving the same treatment that this cat over here is getting, and that you are being represented the same way, even in your officer uniform, that you are being represented the same way. So that same energy that you're giving over here to this, you know, white person or person of color, I need you to have that same energy when it comes to me, and not be like, well, just don't get involved with that. Well, no, because you're going to go to bat for this cat over here. I need you to have that for me. So it's very stressful at times. I need other officers who are not Black to understand that Black folks really ain't okay on the department. I can't speak for everybody, but I know that the officers that I talk to, we're kind of stressed out right now, because what we're dealing with in this particular climate is just, I mean, I've only been on this earth for 47 years. I've never seen anything like this. And we're literally in the intersection. We are in the middle of it. And we're having to be kind of torn both ways. And people on the outside are looking at us like, well, which side are you choosing?
First of all, like I do believe Black Lives Matter, and like one of the things that, you know, blue lives have always mattered. But when we talk about Black Lives Matter, we're talking about how Blacks have disproportionately been suffering from the hands of police, especially police utilizing gun violence. But one thing I want to touch, you know, is that we got to take some responsibility for some of the things that we do. And one of the things that I've noticed a lot, and this is like taboo in the Black community. And I know we don't have a lot of time to talk, but, mental illness. And, I really, if you have a family member or friend that is suffering from mental illness, I'm just going to be honest. Don't call the police, because it ain't going to end well. If you can't control your cousin and your uncle who's suffering from mental illness, how do you suppose a police officer who has no relationship with them, has no type of, and we can't get enough training to deal with people suffering from schizophrenia or these other major mental illnesses. So don't call the police thinking that it will end well. But we need to, there's a lot of things in our community that we have to own up to, and we got to take responsibility. And one of the things, the worst thing I see is people in our community suffering from mental illness, and we don't want to talk about it, nor do we want to deal with it. So we got to step up on that.
I'd like to say that I'm a Black female 100% of the time. 100% of the time, I'm a Black female. I've been a police officer longer than I was not a police officer. I joined the department at 22, 23 years old. I've been a police officer now 26 years. As a Black female police officer, I don't know how I became the enemy as a police officer, number one, because I've gone to work every day to try to do the right thing every day, to treat people fair and treat people the way I would want my mother treated in a situation. That's how I would start. How am I treating mom? That's how I would treat individuals. So I don't know how as a officer, we became the enemy. And I do believe that all lives can't matter until Black lives matter. We're at that point. And I think that as communities, we have to come together, because at some point we have to stop being enemies. And how do we move forward? If you still want policing, because I honestly believe that there is a certain group of people who have started this whole defund the police. And if I heard a pastor say, and I agree with him, that defunding the police, that idea was so radical that it caused people to come to the table to have the discussion. Because when we were talking about police reform, nobody wanted to talk about it. But now when we start talking about dollars and cents, everybody's at the table and, hey, what do we need to do? And maybe we shouldn't deal with people with mental health. Maybe we should send some other folks out to deal with juvenile calls. Maybe someone else can deal with the homeless, because being homeless is not a criminal offense. Being a drug addict is not a criminal offense. The offense is the possession of the drugs. So yeah, maybe some other people can get involved in this and we can have some other social services, but we're at that point. And being at that point, we need people in those communities to come to the table to put their input in. Because when I think about defunding the police, I live in Dallas, I live on the southern side of Dallas. I want police. When I call 911, someone's broken into my house or I'm being a victim of some sort of violent offense, I want police to come. And I do believe that Ms. Johnson and Mr. Rodriguez, they're gonna want the same kind of response. So we have to come together and talk about it and come to a resolve, some sort of positive resolve on this issue.
No, it seems like you all overall are just still very hopeful for the future. And just to quickly wrap this up, like, what's one last thing you want our audience to know that could really build relations between these communities and police officers, especially like Black communities? Really briefly, just because we have a couple minutes.
I will say quickly, engagement, community engagement, and having a relationship with the police. Hopping off from behind the computer and like literally getting involved in initiating programs, community involvement with the police in a positive direction.
I say go out and ride with your local police department.
And I'm gonna say a national police standards, that if I can go to Nail Tech in California, when I visit my family out in San Diego, and I go to Nail Tech here in Dallas, Texas, for the most part, they all have the same standards.
I'd like to see people, Citizen Police Academy. I think every citizen should go through the Citizen Police Academy, and they can actually sit in the seat and see exactly the kind of calls that police officers deal with. A lot of people live under the panacea that because police tell people to do something, that people just automatically do it. And that's so untrue. And I think citizens need to know what police officers deal with. See the bad side. Ride 4 hours a night. 4 hours in 1 week. You can see what police officers deal with. And I think that'll awaken the eyes of the public.
This once again back to value. Understand that the most valuable thing ever created by our Lord is human life. And all human lives are so valuable, and we have to value the other person. Take a minute to put yourself in his shoes and wonder what his or her story is, because everybody got one.
Thank you all so much for just sharing your perspectives and being brave. We really appreciate you being on the ground or been on the ground to really continue to protect us and be there for us. Yeah, just on behalf of everyone, thank you so much for being on this panel. And that is the end of today's episode of Black and Blue for Drive the Conversation. All right, well, thank you, everyone.